Just saying. Don't yourself. Don't worry, I won't. I'm sure. I don't know if you know. It's fine for me.
Just waiting for a few more people to come in the door. Okay, welcome to the Center for Middle Eastern Studies. I'm Professor Goddard. I'm the chair of the center. I'm really glad to be here with all of you to introduce what is the last of our formal lectures of the semester. We have a symposium on Friday on 50 years since the 1967 war, which you're all warmly invited to attend. It's our final event for the semester. This is our final in our lecture series. It gives me great pleasure to be here to introduce author and photographer Hoda Katebi. Hoda is a prominent activist, fashion blogger, and graduate of the University of Chicago, whose research focuses on the underground fashion movement in Iran and the intersections of fashion, gender, and nationhood. In 2013, she founded Juju Azad, an online platform dedicated to the integration of ethical fashion and activism through an anti-capitalist, intersectional feminist lens. Since then, Hoda's work has been featured on various media outlets, including Teen Vogue, German RTL News, NPR, and the Malala Foundation blog. Her work focuses on the power of self-representation and narrative through fashion, writing, and photography, challenging misconceptions about Iran and Islam, encouraging an ethical and minimal lifestyle, and celebrating the beauty that extends beyond that which is narrowly defined by mainstream media. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Hoda Katebi to UC.
Thank you so much to Julia and the whole CMS department for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm the very last lecture of my book tour, so it's been a lot of fun. California is so beautiful and green. It's very unlike Chicago. So it's been a lot of fun just exploring and taking lots of photos of flowers everywhere I go. So I kind of want this to be a little bit more like a discussion. So I'm not just going to be talking the whole time. I really want you guys to ask questions whenever you want. Feel free to interrupt or just raise your hand. Or if you have any specific questions, we'll also have time at the end for Q&A. But if there's something that just caught your attention that you're going to forget, feel free to just jump in at any point. But yeah, so we're going to be talking about Tehran Streetstyle and the politics really of fashion in Iran. And this is my Instagram and Twitter handle, so if any time I bore you throughout any point of this presentation, which probably will happen, feel free to just go through because I talk about everything similarly on my Instagram and Twitter. So you can just pull out and just, if you learn through social media, feel free to do that as well. There's not going to be any other slides, so you have your moment now to pull out your phones. Also, if I see it on your phones at any time during this presentation, I'll just assume you're following me on social media, so it's okay. Not going to get too bad. So, yeah, before I start talking exactly about my research, I just want to briefly talk about how I got into fashion and politics and everything within this kind of scope. And I definitely was not always into fashion, as most fashion bloggers have their stories of always playing dress up. That was not me. My mom actually picked all of my clothing up until I don't want to say. But, so it was not something that was very much interesting for me. I never saw a lot of value in it. But I really learned the hard way that all arts, all public art made for public consumption is political. Whether you like it or not, everything that you make publicly, anything that is artistic is political at the end of the day. And so this concept of apoliticalness does not exist. I think that word is just ridiculous, you know. And so whether or not you intend something to specifically be political, it is. And so when I first started wearing the hijab or headscarf, in 6th grade was also the same year I got physically assaulted. So I was just sitting in my science class, and somebody came up to me after calling me a terrorist repeatedly. I was also born and raised in Oklahoma. This is an important side note. That might have had a little bit to do with it. So he just walked up and he just punched me in the face after calling me a terrorist repeatedly. And that experience for me really kind of made me think about the way that I choose to express myself externally, how I choose to frame my body for public consumption really affects the way that people will look at me and react toward me. So because if I was wearing this scarf around my neck, I probably would not have gotten assaulted for that reason. And also just relevant kind of to what's happening on campus, so hate speech is not free speech, you know, so these are very, very different. And hate speech can lead to violence, can lead to someone being physically assaulted, and it should not be considered free speech at all. And this is something that we should be stopping, because if there's hate speech, it's going to lead to violence, and that has affected me firsthand. And so yeah, I was forced, unfortunately, to experience the product of visual representation gone wrong. Or right, because in this country there is anti-Muslim racism. There is a whole system set up to create and promote violence against Muslims. I don't like to use the word Islamophobia, just because I think that Islamophobia makes it seem like it's a disease that people can have, and it's just like a fear of Muslims, but you don't walk up to someone and punch them in the face if you're afraid of them. Or else there'd be like no clowns within like a 5-foot radius of the other. But it's definitely a very systematic thing. Anti-Muslim racism is the reason why I was punched in the face. It's the reason why a lot of the work that I'm doing now, and so it's very systematic sort of thing that we're facing. And it's very intentional. And so this kind of this tension between external visual representation that is in my hands and the ways that I chose to present my body for public consumption, and versus how the media was always portraying me. Because if you Google Muslims, Muslim women, Iranian women, don't do it. It's kind of scary. So those kind of like tensions coming together was really what led me to start my fashion blog. So it's a radical fashion blog, but I don't like to use the word radical. My mom always tells me to take it down because she says it's dangerous. You can't have like a Muslim face and be like, I'm a radical. So I had to put activist as an alternative, but it's a real fear. And so this is also one of the big thoughts that was in my head leading to the publication of my book and all of my research in Iran. And specifically around my book, I was really thinking about when I went to Iran and just the fact that there's a national dress code, right? So the government dictates the way that both men and women are supposed to dress and present their bodies for external consumption. And it was really interesting for me because every time I'd go to Iran and on billboards, they would have male bodies very seductively posed holding like a bag, like a purse. So men's bodies were used to sell objects to women, so women's bodies were not on billboards like they are here. They weren't used as the object of consumption as they are here. They weren't used to sell things like they are here. It was all the men's body, even if it was for women's objects. So that was always really striking for me. And so those are kind of the thoughts that was going in my mind. And so I went to Iran 2 years ago to do original ethnographic research on the underground fashion scene in Iran, and with these kind of thoughts in my mind. And I wasn't necessarily thinking that I was going to publish a book, but after speaking to so many designers and interviewing them and asking them, so now that I took up 3 hours of your time, with this interview, what can I do for you? And almost across the board, all of them said, well, we know what Americans see when they see Iranians. We know how we're presented in the media. We just want a publication that can celebrate our work. Not even just like yelling at them, not saying like, this is, like we are great, all that stuff. Not just solely set on challenging misconceptions, but just celebrating our work. Like, there's nothing that just says this is what Iranians are. Inspiration is not one directionally, it can come both ways. Just show the beauty of like the work that we do. I was like, all right, stand up, let me take a picture. So that's kind of the formation and what led to the beginning of my book. But we'll talk more about the details in a minute. We're going to go back to the first image. So I took this photo outside an underground fashion scene in Iran, and these are both underground fashion designers. And I want to ask you guys, what is striking to you in this photo?
Hair color.
What about it?
It's blue.
Yes. Why is that striking?
Mostly because I don't think when it comes to I guess ironic that I have my American perception of Iran, it's I wouldn't think that she would have her blue hair hanging out,
Yeah. Yeah,
that's
display. For sure. That's always the first thing everyone says. Anything else? Is this what everyone expected? Yes.
Even how the manto is a bit see-through at the bottom.
He even knows the word manto. What is the manto again?
So the manto is kind of you have to cover, as my mom always says, you have to cover the goods. So the manto is meant to cover from behind. So yeah, so it's interesting how it's see-through because okay. So,
yeah. It's mesh made. But yeah, great story. Yeah?
I don't know if this is surprising, because I went to Iran because I'm also Iranian, but a lot of people don't know that the rusari, like the cloth that they wear over the head, is often pushed back, and women do pull out their hair a lot more these days, and they have all these like highlights and makeup. I mean, they're really well dressed and it's just so fashionable. But I think people are usually surprised that you can put your rusari so in the
Far
back of your
back,
head.
yeah.
Exactly, so far back.
Yeah, definitely. That also always shocks people. They're like, they can walk around with their hair showing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, every time my friends go to Iran, they're like, I feel like this is a reflex for Iranian women because their headscarves keep falling off. And like, without even thinking, they're just like walking, fixing it. But anything else? But specifically about the clothes. Is there like familiar brands that any of you see?
Converse.
Yeah.
Well, to me, this is not surprising because I've been in Iran, but I would say perhaps for some Americans, if you see denim and it's like so tight, so they might say like denim, it's coming from America. So they're wearing these tight denims, and then you see like she's wearing Converse, so like Amazon shoes, so perhaps that's surprising as well. To just going back to the point that you said, some Americans may think people of Iran like don't like Americans, or like they don't like to use like things from America. So to me specifically, the denim, the jeans, and the shoes.
Yeah.
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 Both their mantos, like they're obviously rolled up and like pulled up as well.
Yep.
So
Yeah. They're actually wearing their latest collection inspired by the movie Edward Scissorhands because they said it was replicative of Iranian society. I haven't seen it. It sounds like a scary movie. I was told it is not. But nonetheless, that's what they say. And everyone seems to agree with them. I haven't. Maybe I should watch the movie. Yeah, anything else? But yeah, these are all really great observations. And this is usually not a photo that people typically tend to expect when they think of the word Iran, or even underground fashion design in Iran. It's very, very different. So yeah. And before we can get into specifically, he's actually an underground stripper, but I can't tell you his name. So before we can get into a lot of my work, I want to set a little bit of context around these words. So some people have used the word manto and rusari already, so we're cheating, because there's too many Iranians in this room. But, yes, we have the rusari, which is this outermost, the yellow garment that she's wearing on her head. And I think this is very different from hijab, not to be confused, because the hijab is also, it's for men and for women, and it has to do with also behavior. So a government can't enforce a behavior necessarily, but they can enforce someone to drape something over their head. So that's why I like to call this a rusari and not a hijab, as most people might think that it's a hijab law. I don't think it's a hijab law, I think it's a rusari law, or like a government dress code. So that, I think, is important to know. And then the manto, which you all mentioned. And so this is the outermost garment that she's wearing, the blue thing. And according to the dress code, it should be long, loose, and go beyond the knees here. But we see most of the time in Iran, they're tight, they're short, they're open, and they don't really follow the dress code at all. Does everybody know what this is called?
chador.
Okay, well, yes, it's called the chador, and this is at an underground chador store in Tehran. That's a whole other conversation of itself. All of these chadors behind her are like hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they're just black fabric. A lot of them, like the one that she's wearing is like bedazzled. There's another ones that have like sequins and gold on it. So also chadors, even though we expect them to look like this, they also come in many, they look very, very different. So this is what people would wear to like a dinner party or something like that. So this also has a lot of versatility and design that goes into it. This is a more traditional chador, and this is the chador danishjui, so like the university chador that people wear. It has sleeves, you can see. Sometimes they have pockets for the books. So there's actually designers who design these as well. Any questions on this? So it's not necessarily, this isn't part of the dress code. You're not required to wear this, but this is kind of what the government deems as the epitome of what is good and modest. Because right now for the government of Iran, we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, they want the public image and public bodies to be covered up. They want sort of an egalitarian form of dress, meaning that they want everyone to look very similar. But this idea of what similarity is based on is a demasculine male body. So anything that doesn't fit that concept should be covered up. So for example, hair, body parts and things like that, that doesn't fit this kind of what they deem the most neutral mold as a demasculine male body. So that's why this is the epitome of what is great and perfect. Cool. Does everybody know what these are called? It's the scary people who you always hear about here in the West. No, not the Vestige. Yes?
Yes, there is.
Yes, Gash to Irshad. Do you want to talk about what it is?
I'm not that familiar, but I think they're like people who sort of morality police.
Yeah, that's I like to call them the fashion police. So there's basically a group of people. This is also a scene from a movie. They don't actually look this really well dressed. But they basically walk around in the streets, and whatever they deem to be a fashion faux pas, they can ticket you for it. So one day, what your outfit of the day could be stopped by one person and not by another. So it's really based on their own personal decisions of what looks wrong or what just is clashing. Sometimes I interviewed people who were just like, I just had really bad makeup on that day, and they were like, doesn't look good on you, come get a ticket, you know? So it's very much based kind of on personal interpretation of what is like cute or not cute. Basically what they deem to be like morally reprehensible or breaking dress code. And what they do is they detain men and women that they find in the streets dressed in ways that are deemed improper. And basically what I've heard, largely what happens is that they're just ticketed. They have to sign a paper saying that they'll never ever do it again. They're photographed, and then their parents are usually called to bring them a change of clothes. Or if their parents are not there, one girl told me they actually went and they bought her a pair of pants. She was wearing leggings, these pants. And she said she still wears those pants, she said they were so cute. But I don't want to take away from the fact that there are very bad encounters with the Gasht Irshad. They're not as common as we hear here in the West. But there are cases where people will talk back and they'll be jailed overnight or things like that. So it's not all just like cute and funny. There have been some worse incidences, but they're not as common as we may think. It's great. Any questions on the Gasht? Cool. What is this? The underground. So this legal ambiguity that we just talked about in the Gasht Irshad is also kind of how I see the underground fashion scene in Iran. I define it as like a semi-organized and very loosely put together interconnected network of illegal activity. And in order to create clothing in Iran, you have to have a mujaviz or a permit that allows you legally to work. And with this permit comes minor government surveillance, so you have to make sure they'll come and they'll make sure your designs are all within dress code. And other forms of, you have to pay taxes, you have price caps, and economic regulations. And so it's important to note that not everyone who designs underground is actually doing so for very political reasons. Some of them just say they don't want to go through a bureaucratic process of applying for a mujaviz. Some of them, they don't want to pay taxes. Some of their clothing is more expensive than the price caps. So here we always like to hear about kind of the underground as like this site of liberation for women, is because they're challenging government dress codes and this is how they're going to do it, you know? But not everyone who is actually designing underground is actually doing so for political reasons. A lot of it's economic, actually. Any questions on this? Okay, so now that we have basic kind of understanding of what Iran is right now, everything that I'm wearing, minus my demilitarized shirt, which I in Chicago, is from Iran. Oh, and minus my shoes. They're from here too. But if I'm walking in the street, like right now, almost everything I'm wearing is illegal. So can you guess what right now I'm doing to break dress code in Iran? Sorry?
You're showing your upper.
Yes. This is illegal. It needs to go all the way down to the cup. What else? It is. It's too short and it's open in the front. So this would be illegal to wear because it's open in the front. What else?
Your headstock is too far back.
It's kind of too far back, but everyone in Iran wears like this, so it actually wouldn't be. The specific amount isn't necessarily written in the law how much your hair should or shouldn't show. So I couldn't really get stopped legally for this, although if I was wearing like something else that they didn't like, they could pull me over. So like legally. Anything else? There's one last thing. This is what they would call ajibghari, or like strange, in Iran. So it has, it's asymmetrical, it has like a random person, I mean this is not random, it's a Qajar king. So it looks different and it looks very strange. So this was designed by underground fashion designers in Iran. And so I could get stopped just because this looks different. And it's very strange because it has this like asymmetrical thing here. So that's also, again, it's really up to them. If they just see something that doesn't fit, then they can just pull you over. So yeah, any questions on like what Iran's like dress code is? Yes.
So are certain patterns then, I mean, so you said that symbol on the side would be illegal, is it because of what it is, or because it's just not sort of like a neutral sort of pattern?
Well, the symbol isn't illegal. So
Oh,
the
okay.
image itself, but because it is just, it's different. Like it's very, very different from the norm. So actually this designer recently, her Instagram account, which is the main way that designers sell their products because there's no other social media, got shut down because she was getting too large and popular, so they shut her down. And so these are no longer made, but also she's always talking about how her customers were very nervous to buy her clothing because they were so different than what you would see on the street, so she had low sales. But yeah.
Is there any problem that it's a depiction of a human being, though, given Islamic regulations, I guess?
No. Like this one I actually bought, this has like poetry on it and like ancient mythological creatures from like Iranian mythology, and I bought this in a government store. So this is actually from the underground. This is like from the above ground regulated. So image-wise, they're not very particular about it. Maybe if someone's wearing, I mean, you can see people wearing American flags walking around like without nervous, like care. And we know how Iranians feel about American flags. Government, I mean, yeah.
So to what extent do the regulations go into like what you can design or what you can't design, or like the different types of styles of clothing?
Right, so because the government, so all the dress codes that we went through in the beginning, so like it has to be long, it has to be closed, it has to be this and that, those are the basic kind of template for a dress code for what the manteau should look like. So anything beyond that would be illegal. And
For the license?
yeah,
Like, oh,
because with the license comes government surveillance. So they'll be checking to make sure that your dress codes are like, your designs are fitting that. Yeah.
And could you speak to, I don't know if you had this, but your experience in other cities besides Tehran and how the rigor of the checks were increased? Like instead of like Qom or Mashhad or Katebi?
Yeah, so this is, I should mention this is all specific to Tehran. So Qom or Mashhad, which are more religious cities, the normalized dress code there is also a little bit different, it's a little bit more religious. The charter that we saw is a little bit more normalized there. But, yeah. Okay. So, now that we're on the same page with modern Iran, it's important to contextualize this because a lot of the violence that I think happens when we talk about Iran is that we decontextualize everything that's happened. So we know there's a dress code, we know that it's this or that, we don't know why it came to place, or was a reaction to, or what came before that. So, and as my work deals largely with gender in Iran is very fascinating in history of it. So I think it's really important that we talk about that. So unlike most history books, Iranian history does not start in 1979, the year of the revolution. It starts much before that. Prior to European contact, actually, that's sneak peek. Prior to European contact, Iran was largely homosocial, meaning that gender fluidity was very normal. Men would hold hands with men. Things that we now would call gay or things that homosexual people would do was very normal in Iran. So like a man would have a wife, but then he'd also go and have sex with a man. This is very normal in Iran, and so if we look at images, and I'll show you in a minute, you can't, not only can you not tell men or women apart, you can't tell gender apart. There is not really as a specific gender identity as there is now today in the West. And this is all very much a normalized part of Iran under an Islamic dynasty as well. So within the 19th century, contact with Europe intensifies, and we all know with imperialism comes patriarchy, and with patriarchy comes homophobia. So gender becomes more binary, and sexuality becomes more heterosexual, and women continue to wear headscarves, but the Europeans, because they say, oh my god, your men are lusting after each other, how backwards is that? We blame the women, because they're all covered up, that's why you guys like each other, because your women are covered. So the hijab now becomes very much a backward symbol, something that's hindering like Iranian society from progressing, because the men keep lusting after each other. And this became particularly problematic because every time Western dignitaries would come to Iran, there's so many stories of like Iranian people in the monarchy writing letters after the British dignitaries, because they were wearing very tight pants, they had pronounced butt cheeks. They would write very, very sexualized letters to UK dignitaries who would come to visit. And so this, of course, made them very uncomfortable. They're like, guys, this is not okay. You can't sexualize all of our diplomats who are coming to your country. So that's kind of, and with that slowly became an enforced kind of culture shift. Because they're like, men don't like being the object of desire. That kind of takes away, that checks their privilege a little bit. Only women can be sexualized like that, of course. So that's why the push to make Iranian society more heterosexual started its movement. So visually, images shifted from images of gender nonconformity, which we talked about, and homosexuality, to male gazes and women becoming strictly the object of desire. So for example, this is an image from a Qajar, from the Qajar area. And so is anything particularly striking to you in this?
She's grabbing his crotch.
She said she's grabbing his crotch. But is that, yeah, there you go. There was a hand-on crotch placement. Yes, but that wasn't the point of this image, but that is very much happening. Anything else?
He has long hair.
Yes, one of them have long hair, and the other one also kind of has a similar hairstyle. Anything else?
Well, the way that their bodies are framed in terms of the composition of the picture itself, it's very hard to distinguish what gender you may identify as.
Definitely, yes. So also your brows are really big. So that was us. And so this is a very, very typical image of what you'd see in the Qajar dynasty. As you can tell, it's very hard to tell, again, not even male from female, but gender, because male and female were not constructed in the same ways that they are here today. Yes?
There also doesn't seem to be a dominant person.
Yeah, actually,
experiencing equal.
exactly. And some people actually call this an amorous couple, that's the name of the piece, but then some say it's two lesbians, some people say it's two gay men, so it's just an amorous couple. Love is love, as they say in this country. In 1936, Reza Shah declared mandatory unveiling for all Iranian women. And so here we're always like, oh, Iranian current society is so oppressive, it forces a dress code on women. Just like France is also enforcing unveiling. Iran, a backed king, or a king backed by the United States, actually enforced unveiling for Iranian women. So my grandmother would tell me stories about how she would see people with a chador and they would be pulled off by police officers. Women who wore hijab were not allowed to get government jobs, they weren't allowed in a lot of restaurants, and therefore women who wore the hijab became very, very low in society. They were unable to get a lot of jobs, it was very economically impoverishing. So as this continued, the hijab started to signify a sort of class distinction with this. Visually, this also kind of shifted in the public commodification of the female body, so things that we see a lot of times in Western advertisements now rely on the sexualized female body to sell objects. So women, again, are now placed on billboards, women's bodies are used to sell perfume and things like that. In 1979, the Shah dynasty is overthrown. And I like to say Iranian and not Islamic revolution because it was actually in the Islamic and Marxist revolution together, and they were all executed. So it was not just Muslims who were revolting, it was a large group of people, but it's the Iranian revolution. And then we all know what Jerusalem manto is. So now that was mandated, and that was to kind of change the class distinction to create that egalitarian form of dress. They don't wanted the hijab to be a signifier of class. Because no one wanted to wear it at this point. And interesting enough, also when the Shah made the mandatory unveiling, it was actually mandatory veiling for prostitutes. So this is also very patriarchal in the sense that they use a woman's body to kind of devalue an object, but also at the same time trying to devalue an object by putting on a prostitute. So whenever police officers were driving around, they would force prostitutes to wear a hijab, just to further devalue the symbol. And so the decision to make a mandatory hijab was in part a reaction to this, and also in part to reaction to create its own kind of identity that's separate from the West because they just overthrew like a Western dictator or a king. And so it was also a kind of idea to try to create itself a national identity. Visually, all of the advertisements, images, and commodification, objectification, classification were removed, and just images of the revolutionary leader, slight sarcasm, Khomeini was put everywhere. And a lot of those images are still up, so you see pictures of Khomeini's face everywhere in Iran. 1 year later, the war with Iraq started, and this is when the Gasht-e-Irshad was institutionalized to enforce the dress code. Visually, because now they want, this war is going on, images of the male war martyr and the male body begin to dominate public space to kind of encourage people to go into the war, very much glorifying soldiers and things like this. So this image here is a picture of shaheeds, and this is, you'll see in Iran all the time still today. So shaheeds are people who have died in the war in Iran, according to Iranians. And so this is just a mural of a bunch of people who have died in the war. So this is very much becoming normal after the war to kind of encourage people, and honor soldiers and things like that. Then, after the war ended, fluctuations in enforcement and tolerability based on the president and whoever was in power kind of shifted. In 1990, Rafsanjani is president, and this is kind of when commercial advertisements began to finally reappear, because before this it was still just kind of male war martyrs and images of war. In 2006, the UN approved sanctions against Iran, which is an incredibly devastating to the Iranian economy and still very, very much felt within Iranian society and industry. But visually, what this means is that the domestic production of fashion sparked. So however horrible these sanctions were, it still was able to spark a lot of domestic production of fashion because they no longer could import it anymore. So this is kind of when the beginnings of this underground fashion movement is starting. The current president, Hassan Rouhani, then also further has been kind of encouraged leniency, so everyone has noted that in the current presidential regime there seems to be more leniency in dress code by the Gasht-e-Irshad, and this is when the underground fashion scene really is starting to grow. So that's where we are today. Any questions on this visual and this political history of Iran? Crash course? Oh, good. Awesome. So now we're just going to focus on the past 5 years, because that's when the underground fashion scene, as you just know, is really kind of growing and flourishing. So actually, this photo, is there anything striking to you that hasn't been in the other past photos? It might be a little hard to see. She's not wearing hijab, or I mean, studying, but yeah. Yeah, so she was a lot of my tour guide for most of the trip. She's also a photographer and introduced me to a lot of the people in the underground fashion scene. And we were just in an abandoned construction site, and she just took off her hijab and started taking photos. So in more secluded areas of Tehran, this is a newer phenomena that people are just, they feel very comfortable to just take it all off, they do a quick photo shoot for their Instagram, and then put it back on and resume their life. So this is happened in northern Tehran. So this image I took from an underground fashion exhibition. I don't know if it was as alluring as we thought it was going to be. But this is basically how they go, is that a lot of underground brands come together to showcase their latest collection using a very slow fashion model of production. And unfortunately, we don't have time to talk too much about how much I think the West should learn from that, because fast fashion is incredibly destructive. But slow fashion in the sense that Iranian designers, they made very small capsule collections, highly personalized to their own audience. So they had everyone's phone numbers. There was very much a personal relationship that people had with their designers. They wanted to design with them in mind. And it wasn't based on trends. It wasn't, you can't really advertise because there's nowhere for you to advertise if you're doing legal work. And so this very much art of fashion is very big. And the fact that you can't very highly capitalize and commodify something and strip away its artistic value because you have to make it slowly. You have no other choice because you have a very small team, you can't advertise in mass, and things like that. So particularly, one brand that I want to talk about today that was really striking for me is Farda Design. And the two girls who you saw with the blue hair in the beginning, this is their collection. So that's their Instagram in the top right-hand corner, and their Instagram is public, I'm pretty sure. But most of them are private because they don't want government surveillance. So if you want to quickly pull that up, they have all of their latest collections on there too. And if you want to look through that. And so what was striking for me was not only how they're designing their clothes, but how they're also documenting and shooting their editorials. So what is striking to you here in the way that they play with gender in particular?
They draw like some sort of shadow where a mustache would be something.
Yeah, the angle of the photography is so much that she almost looks she's given facial hair.
But that's not, it looks like I thought it was makeup.
No, it's shadow. She has heavy dark eye makeup, but that's shadow. There you go. Nothing about this looks good.
Well, like, the angles of like lapels, it's harkening back to like what was common even the West in the 80s, like the really strong angles that were meant to kind of make it, like, play around with the shapes of the body itself.
Yes. Yeah, so these strong shoulders, very like, not just masculine, but kind of hyper masculine. You know, they're very, very large, the colors of it. Yes, exactly. What else? You guys don't have a fashion department in this school? I actually presented to a fashion department at Parsons before this, and everyone was like, this part, this, and I was like, I don't know any of these terms, but yes.
I think what she's wearing, like the necklace.
Yes,
It's like, it's to me it's like a symbol of fixing things, and like definitely the shoulders from the 80s. We've got power shoulders, which is the time after World War II when women were already in the society, and you see that this is, I can definitely tap into the 80s and power shoulder. Like Yves Saint Laurent brought in actually during the 80s, but it's just reminds me of that, the shoulders, which is a symbol of power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the necklace.
What about the necklace? Do you see what that is?
It's a wrench.
Yeah, it's a wrench, like a tool, which is also what typically associated with in society, like masculinity, like always fixing things, not ruining things. Of course not. What else?
Facial expression.
What about it? Yes.
Just like the focus and determination, the way she's looking.
It's not feminine. So we can all agree that this is not feminine. Both in the way that it's photographed, her face, her facial expression, the look on her face, the outfit itself, even the colors, the black with the dark blue. But she's also wearing nail polish. So this is a very striking collection. And this was called the Mechanical Collection. And actually, it's really cool because it's all put together by like nuts and bolts. So you can actually take off labels, you can take off the bottom part, and like put together something else that you want. So this is actual art of fashion, but what am I saying? So yeah, and what was really striking is that not only is now this masculinity, remember how we talked about we wanted the normal body in Iran to be a demasculine male body, this is hyper-masculinity being introduced in Iranian public space, but through the female body. So it's almost an attempt to even poke fun of like this demasculine male body by hyper-masculating it and letting a woman wear it. Like this is, because men don't wear mantos in Iran. So this is just a women's clothing item. And so this masculinity entering public space through the female body, or almost androgyny, because she does have she's wearing short shorts, no one pointed that out. And also the background looks very industrial and things like that. This is a very interesting way that Iranians, or this label at least, is using masculinity and the masculine body for female public presentation, and almost pushing the state's vision of the normative public gender expression to the extreme. So essentially, the Farah Designs Mechanical Collection brings masculinity into public space through the female's body. And yeah, they're using fashion as a way to kind of communicate and comment on gender in Iran. So any questions on this before we move on to Western violence? Favorite topic?
When like these are put on, like is this photo on Instagram?
Yes, this photo is
So
on
like
Instagram.
with the short shorts, like does anything, do they get in trouble or?
Yeah, so if you look also at their Instagram right now, a lot of their latest collection is like crop tops that have like holes all through it, and like shorts that have holes all through it. And so they're one of the few Instagram accounts that are still public. Most underground designers in Iran still have their accounts on private just because of this fear of government sort of surveillance or closure. But at the same time, it's important to note that the government is very much aware about the underground fashion scene. You can't hide from the government in your country that you have this whole operation going within their boundaries. You know, so the legal ambiguity that we talked about in the beginning with the Gashir Shad and the network itself is very much a continual trend within Iranian society as a large. So sometimes even one person who I interviewed, she mentioned that government officials had a design competition, and they invited people from the underground fashion scene to participate in this collection, but they're like, maybe you should put your account on private so no one will know. You know, or, and they invited designers to come and kind of participate to create legal government clothing, and then they can go back to what they're doing. It's like, they're like, you know you have good work, you know, but we just, we want you to like do it for us. Yeah,
and then yeah, like with that, are the people like who are these underground fashion designers, are they part of like the ultra wealthy class of Tehran? Because I know that might also give them like more power in that they're not getting arrested or not getting in trouble.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the underground fashion scene in Iran is largely mostly designated for the upper class in Iran because A, if you're going to be walking around with something like this, that's like strange, you have the privilege of bribing the police if needed to get out of a ticket or paying your ticket. So people who don't have a lot of money can't go around paying tickets left and right or bribing people left and right. So also it takes a lot of time to find underground fashion designers. Not everyone, the privilege of leisurely time of going to these shows, which are usually all up in northern Tehran, which is the bougie, wealthy part of Tehran. You have the freedom to look and find these underground designers. So there's a lot of privilege that goes into being able to buy them. And so this, for example, which is a very basic sort of piece of underground designer art, was like $300, like American dollars. And so this also is like expensive for a lot of people here. This piece here was about $500 to $600. Yeah, and that's roughly about the average income for a month in Tehran, like the average, yeah. So definitely upper class.
What keeps these underground designers from staying in Iran and not going outside of Iran and like actually and like establishing a career that like is much more open and like they have like I don't want to say become more successful, but they become more open, like more comfortable, I guess. With their, I don't know.
A lot of people do think about it, and it's not something that is an easy decision to make, to leave your family, leave a country that shares your culture and language and everything and pick up and go. And right now, actually, you'll see like this, for example, we talked about is like the Qajar era dynasty, that's an image. Or this that I'm wearing has like ancient Iranian poetry on it. A lot of Iranians right now are very much tired, for the same reasons that I made my book, tired of challenging everything in the West. And they want to just start really celebrating their own culture. So they're like, I want to be here and have a cultural shift and push for that in my own country rather than just giving up and going, you know? And so, for example, like I mentioned about like this piece, for example, like that was their intention. They want to have a cultural shift through fashion, and they think that they can very much do that through the art.
I'm just wondering because like the prices that you're saying are really, really high, so the consumer market in Tehran is very, very small. So I'm wondering how they make a living off. Like how would they?
There's enough wealthy people in northern Tehran. Let's just put it that way. But yeah, we can also, if there's any more questions on this, we can talk about that at the end. But now for my favorite part and final part. How is it that all of this complication that we saw, all of this diversity, all of this like ambiguity is just flattened and homogenized so easily here in this country? How are Iranians still banned? You know, how are we still called backwards, terrorists? You know, how was I punched in the face for wearing a headscarf? You know, all of these like very simple things, and yet we just learned about the diversity. We just learned about how non-homogeneous Iranian society and culture and views are, and yet it just keeps happening. And so I want to kind of contextualize this in an international context and talk about a lot of the violence that's happening right now and how representation is positive and beautiful, and art like that can definitely be used for cultural shift, but both good and bad. So, because this isn't, again, Islamophobia, this is anti-Muslim racism that a lot of people are having to deal with, and especially as young women in Iran, the focus of my research, they not only have to deal with a state that is dictating the dress code, they also have to deal with all of these horrible representations here, you know, American imperialism here, sanctions that came up here, and very much from institutions like this that are causing a lot of harm. On my walk over here, there's like a military section of the school. What is that? I mean, I came to a private school, so I guess this is the public part. But like very much, violence can come from institutions just like this. And so that's why I think it's important that we have this conversation. And how many people are in the CMES program here? Just curious.
It's not a department in that sense, it's a research center, so,
Oh.
yeah.
Near Eastern Studies.
How, that one? Just you? Has anyone read the book Orientalism? Okay, good. Good, because they didn't teach that at my university, the University of Chicago. So I think it's a very, very important thing that we read. So speaking of which, Orientalism. One of the main ways that Iranians, Muslims, Middle Eastern people, the Orient is depicted, according to Palestinian philosopher Edward Said, is through this Orientalist lens. And so he kind of sums up his work in short, Orientalism is a Western style for dominating, restructuring, and having authority over the Orient. So basically this means that Western literature and thought creates and maintains and perpetuates this archetype of a docile and submissive Muslim woman due to her religious leanings, and renders Islam as homogenous and backwards, controlling. And so anything really that is associated with Islamic clothing, so the more Islamically you dress, the more backwards you are, the more oppressed you are. And more precisely the women's hijab as this oppressive instrument designed to render women as submissive beings. And so, can you guys think of any examples of this that you've seen in the media? Orientalism? You can like blurt that out. Wow, this media is so safe. Maybe Oakland, I guess, in this part of the country.
Just like recent media.
Can you have an example?
I'm not thinking of like those like media stories. Like when we were down about crimes. Just there's a lot in my Google literature, I think, especially from the 20th century. I don't know about recently.
What happens every single day? In the news. Does anyone have any specific examples?
I mean, it's so obvious. In Asian American films, back in like the 40s and 50s, mostly Asian women were perceived as like mysterious, sexualized.
Yeah, definitely. You guys?
I would just say, like, even this picture, I feel like is sort of like an example of it, like the cobra, the mystic, snake. I don't know. At least for me, I haven't seen any of these sorts of images in like ancient Persian art or culture.
Yeah. Or anything that comes out of Trump's mouth.
Right. Yeah. I'd say
What were you guys saying?
Just even the fact that like art like this, as a medium and a genre, has inspired entire fashion collections in Europe. Like I believe it was like Alexander Holmgren did in the 80s, like an entire collection based on these paintings, and several other designers from France and Italy have like done this repeatedly. And this is also like leaked into also like Southwest Asia. Like Turkish designers will also re-emulate these kinds of images to like kind of like seem interesting and like open themselves up to a European market that like loves still to consume these things.
Definitely. Yeah. But anyone has seen the cover of the Vogue Arabia first edition?
I guess calling someone that's not white exotic is Orientalist.
Yes, definitely. And this is important that it does extend, you can be Orientalist, not just Muslims too. There are more people who can be Orientalist. Great. Another way that a lot of violence is enacted is through the use of a native informant. So Spivak, who is a brilliant scholar, talks about the use of the subaltern figure that is basically this native informant that is necessary for any sort of European representation project. A native informant materializes into an authentic voice that is taken out of context in order to support the writer or the presenter's argument, and then they quickly vanish again when they're no longer necessary. So, for example, she actually is the head of the Muslim Republican Club group. This is Fox News, for those of you who don't watch it. And so she here is being asked to confirm all of the violences of Muslims. You know, like she talks about how much, yes, you know, the Muslim ban is a good thing. They are crazy people that we shouldn't be bringing over here. And because she's Muslim, everyone's like, she's Muslim, she knows her people, you know? And this happens all the time. But this is not just for Muslims. This is very, very much for every sort of person of color. So is there any other examples that you can name of like a native informant being used? Sorry?
Corsa?
You want it? Yes. Yes. In Chicago, this happens all the time. We always have, whenever the Chicago Police Department is talking about another police shooting, they always have a black police officer doing the one talking about it. You know, so that happens a lot in that community. Yeah.
I remember I'm also from Oklahoma, so I have a lot of friends on Facebook that are from here, and so I get to see a lot of Indonesian things on my feed. One video that was going around was one of, oh my gosh, what's the actor name? It's a black actor, is it Samuel Jack? No. What's his name? See, I don't remember now. But anyway, some really famous black actor was like saying that the whole Black Lives Matter movement is ridiculous and blah, 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 and they just spread that around like, well, if he says it, then he speaks for everyone, and that's why we should support it. So I guess that's an example of
Yes.
something important.
And also at the same time, an important part of this is also they're not also allowed to speak further beyond what they're given to speak about. So for example, if this black officer who's like saying that, oh no, it was intentionally a knife or whatever, if he's ever saying, well, you know, maybe we should like invest in mental health and education on the south side of Chicago, he won't be allowed to say that. You know, he's only given what he can say to fit this agenda that they have. Okay. So when you put the two together, there's a dichotomy that's established and perpetuated that pits basically this native informant, so anyone who is, in case of Iranian fashion, this Western liberal person who is dressed in, you know, Western-looking fashion and seen as so free. You know, she's let free by Western fashion, and pitted against this Orientalist rendition of the homogenous, backwards, and submissive religious woman. And so an oversimplified link between Iranian women's fashion choices and their consequent relationship to modernity and political activism then is established. And these two images right here are actually taken, I put them together, but they were right on top of each other in a BuzzFeed article. So I did not juxtapose these like images, they did themselves. So what can you see, like what is striking to you out of like this juxtaposition? It's like almost exaggerated.
They're complete opposites in a lot of
Yes.
ways.
One's black and white, one's in color, one's older woman. One's like a beautiful young woman with dyed hair, you know. Very much kind of pushing this dichotomy. Something else that someone pointed out I didn't even realize once is that, also look at the agency. Despite the fact that this one is a very like black and white, older women wearing religious clothing, they're protesting. Like they are actually on the streets doing something, and yet she's just standing there. I mean, I'm not saying that your body is not, you know, you're not an agent of your own body as well, but at the same time, it's interesting that that is not being commented on at all. It's just about fashion and just about the way that they're choosing to dress themselves as whether or not they're modern or backwards or politically active or like rebelling against their government or not. Yeah. Any questions here? Or anything else that's interesting about this?
It's even interesting, like, because, you know, a lot of time, like, Iranian women, when they wear the chador, like, you hold it, like, to keep it closed, almost, and, like, you see that kind of, a lot of women there, and then on the other image, it's almost like the opposite, the way that she's, like, kind of flaring her clothes out.
Yeah, that's a good point too, I didn't think about that. Yeah, and a lot of the older chador style, it's just one piece of fabric. It's like you're very skilled if you learn how to like navigate and hold it in your top, like between your teeth, and so you can carry your bags. So it's like a skill. I tried it once, and it was very bad. Yeah, got trouble. So yeah, basically, Iranian women are always found as sort of this epicenter of political tension. Their bodies are always being continually recalled in order to measure the backwardness, modernity, morality, or whatever greater society, whether it's by the West or by the East. Because it's also important to note that Iranian government also uses the same dichotomy, but in reverse. So they see everything as Western fashion to be backwards, and Islamic fashion to be modern. And so Iranian women are kind of sitting at this juxtaposition, and men, but mostly women, because their bodies are the one that gets to dictate morality. And so yeah, that's largely a lot of the kind of tensions and complexity that goes into the Iranian fashion scene right now. So yeah, and that's why largely my book is kind of using fashion, the same sort of public external presentation and the language of communication to challenge both domestic Iranian dress codes and those oppressive patriarchal sort of dress code, but also Western Orientalist propaganda and the violence in that. And so that's why I wrote the book. Because at the end of the day, all art is political, you know, whether or not you choose it to be. And so so why not use it as such? And this is actually an outfit that I was wearing in Iran as well at a university, and I was trying very, very hard to be stopped by the Gasht Irshad just to like see what that went like. So if you can see, I'm wearing a very open manteau. I was wearing a crop top. It was like a shirt under it, but like not at all covering my waist. And the only thing that happened is like they drove by and like cover up, and I was like, oh, that's all? You want to stop me? So 4 months like this to get stopped. Is there any other questions that anyone has? Anything else? Yep.
When you were doing this research there, were you ever, well, I'm not sure what the history's been between how, like the gap between this visit in Iran and the one previous, but if it was a quick jump from just a normal visit to actually like being in the trenches doing this kind of research, was there ever a moment that you were either nervous or anxious in taking part in the underground like scene?
No. I think, and largely, according to the young people that I spoke to, they don't really take very seriously a lot of like these scary things that we hear about. So for example, some people told me like the scariest thing about getting stopped by the Gasht Irshad was the phone call home to their parents. Because they're like, now my parents are gonna get me in trouble. You know, and so there's a lot of ways that you can get out of things, especially if you can bribe police officers. There is a very real threat, and I can't go back. I probably don't want to go back to Iran right now. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was fun.
Did you have any parents?
No, I didn't. I was traveling by myself. Any other questions?
So one thought that comes to mind, so we see the political activism of Iranian women with the difference in fashion that's been changing over the past few years. Has the activism changed or increased?
Has there been more or less activism? I would say there's always been activism in every country, you know, whether or not there's like reporting of it. And I think the framing of it in the West has changed a little bit. So there's a lot of different times where there's been ongoing activism on the ground, and here in the West there'll be a complete shift in the way that we look at it. So for example, under Ahmadinejad there was a young person who raped a minor, and he was a minor himself, and he was a man and he like raped a boy. And they were going to execute him in Iran. And so they were going to execute him because it was a rape, not so much that it was man against man, like a homosexual rape. But when the West got hold of that, they turned it into this whole gay case. You know, that, oh, they're going to like execute a gay person in Iran. So that shifted the entire like case to be framed as a gay case. You know, whereas in fact on the ground in Iran there was a lot of organizing being done to end the death penalty for minors. So they were trying to shape it as a case to be against, like you're putting a minor to death. But that got overshadowed. So despite all of their efforts on the ground, when it was turned into this gay case, Ahmadinejad was then, we have no gays in this country, he shall be put to death. You know, so because of the way that it was framed, and the way that the West played in that role, it ended in a way that it could have not ended if Iranian organizing on the ground was overshadowed. Because a lot of times, this happens all the time, even still today with everything. We forget the fact that people are active and have agency in other countries, especially in the Middle East. And so a lot of times when we're like, oh my God, what can we do to save them? How can we go in and help? We need to understand that there are people on the ground already organizing or on the ground doing, challenging, you know, they have their own things that they're trying to overcome and challenge. And so if we want to be in solidarity with them, we should figure out how to support their work rather than how we think that we should be solving the issue. That I kind of ranted a little bit based on my own, but does that kind of answer your question?
I was just going to go off that and just say, I mean, yeah, the white sacred complex is way real and disturbing. So how do you suggest going about finding the way that is best to support something that, you know, those grassroots movements or whatever that, you know, should be done the way that they see it is best, but you don't want to like overshadow or like lead it. It's not what you want to do, you just want to do what you can to help.
I think there are a few things. So I think it's always important to listen, of course, to what's happening on the ground rather than quickly deciding that you're an expert on an issue. And I see this a lot specifically around Syria. I see that a lot of people who don't know what's happening quickly want to be an expert and talk about something. And this usually happens all the time with Middle Eastern issues because of Orientalism, as we discussed, they have no agency. You know, they're just backwards. They don't know what's best for them. And so a lot of people quickly feel like they can become an expert in an issue and kind of write off what they think is best. For me, at least, what I try to do, and I don't know if this is the best way, it's just what I like to do, is I like to fill my social media or my Twitter timeline or my Facebook timeline with the people who I want to be in solidarity with. You know, so if, for example, like the bomb that was recently dropped in Afghanistan, I quickly went to all of the people who I know on the ground in Afghanistan and was reading reports from them, you know, sharing their words rather than coming and sharing other people's like interpretations of what they saw. And so I think it's important to really start listening to people who are on the ground, people who are there, people who are from this country. Buy my book, no, I'm kidding. And so that I think is really important. And yeah, I think it requires a lot of shift about the way that we engage with people and the way that we see other people in their agency. Yeah, this is a broad question, so my answer is broad. Yeah.
I had a question about like just the Western, just in general, the Western perception of Islamic fashion in general, and like the fact that like, they don't really see Islamic dress codes like being able to be fashion. A lot of them have like started catering to Islamic dress codes. Like Dolce & Gabbana released a collection that's strictly like catered to Muslim women and which is like a hijab, like a lot of a hijabi collection. Do you see that as more of like something that's like appropriation, like something appropriating the Islamic fashion, or do you also see it as like an opportunity for the West to like see Islamic dress code as like something that can be fashion, be aligned with something like Dolce & Gabbana on it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I actually write a lot about this on my website. I think that it's important that we don't accept surface level inclusion. So diversity and representation are so important. You know, I would have loved growing up like in like Hink, Oklahoma, to have like seen somebody who looked like me doing great things in the news, you know, rather than just always a terrorist. So yeah, so I think that's important. But at the same time, Dolce & Gabbana models were not Muslim. They're all white. They were all very skinny. So that's not really diversity. You're just putting a scarf on someone's head to tap into $1 billion industry in the Gulf. So it's not really about representation. It's about monetary exploitation. And in fact, if we want to talk about this is a huge trend right now, so thank you so much for bringing this up when we start ranting. Nike Pro hijab, for example. That was very problematic in my eyes, because A, they're overshadowing all of the Muslim brands that are already creating sports hijabs, you know, that now they're hailed as the first ones to do it. But they weren't. There have been sports hijabs for as long as Muslim women have been running. I don't know how long that is. I don't run, so maybe not. But it's overshadowing all of their work. At the same time, if you really want to be supporting Muslim women, if a brand really wants to support Muslim women, why don't you start with your sweatshops so you're exploiting Muslim women? You know? So they want to just, right now there's like a political revolution happening and everyone wants to be part of the resistance. Everyone wants to be like including like Muslims, you know, they always want to have that Richard Ferry, I hate that American flag poster, I'll talk about that in a minute, so I'm asking about that too. They always want to put that on their door and say, you know, we love Muslims, but are they going to come out and protest the war? Are they going to come out and protest surveillance or drone strikes? The ways that Muslims are actually being targeted and harmed. Are they going to change the way they see Orientalism? You know, are they not going to be writing Orientalist papers? Things like that. So I think right now we're at a point where a lot of Muslims are kind of also buying into the surface level inclusion. I think it's really harmful. But also we can't just let a brand put on a headscarf, which also is not an identity. You know, you can't wear a hijab for a day and be Muslim, and then let them become now like the leaders of the revolution. So I think we have to be looking deeply about, just as everything is very complex as we saw here, we can't just let a surface level sort of inclusion be a gateway for being inclusive Muslim women. Yes.
I think we can take the time. Okay, two last questions. Well, it's really just piggybacking on the question. I just want to know, like, what your opinion is, personal opinion of National Hijab Day.
Good question. What do you think my opinion is on National Hijab Day? I don't like it. I'm not a fan. I actually also wrote a piece about it. You can check my blog. Most of my cards are up here if you actually want to read my stuff. But I think for the same reasons, in that we very, very much minimize the value of hijab, and we allow going back to this kind of surface level idea of what it is, that to the point where anything that hijab equals Muslim. And this is very problematic. This is problematic not only for people seeing Muslims, but also for Muslims who don't wear the hijab, who now feel compelled to wear the hijab as the only way they can feel Muslim, because that's what the identity has been turned into. So I think wearing hijab day is very problematic because A, you don't need to become the identity of something in order to be in solidarity with them. I don't need to put on blackface to go march in a BLM protest. In fact, that would be very offensive, you know, I think. And people don't need to experience what it feels like to wear a hijab in order to be in solidarity with Muslims. At the same time, wearing a hijab is not a Muslim experience, especially if you're still a white passing person or a white person. You will also get a very different experience because the majority of Muslims in this country are POC or black, you know, and they already have a layer of oppression. So I think it's very dangerous and harmful, and it can overshadow a lot of the complexity of this issue.
I think we'll just add in, sorry.
Was she the last one? Sorry.
Just like one last point is the fact that like assuming that hijab equals Muslim also erases a lot of cultures who do have headdress as part of their heritage and culture, and it's just kind of a collapsing of them into an identity that belong to precisely like erasures. Cannot be appreciated.
Yes.
Yeah, I just had a question about the designers and whether, so you mentioned fast versus slow fashion, and whether they have an ethical commitment to certain labor practices or whether they're producing locally because of need and, you know, what those variations are, what the debate is around that. And then my second question was, what has the responses, plural, been like in the Iranian American community to your work? So what are the most surprising reactions to that?
Those are both good questions. Unfortunately, most Iranians are less concerned for ethical standards as like why they're producing slow fashion as just so much they don't have that many clients, or that's just kind of how they do their business. But at the same time, I think it's also largely a cultural thing. So as part of this individualistic kind of capitalist culture that we have in many different countries, it's just a culture around not caring about the environment, not caring about things, you know, profit is very much centered. But in a lot of collectivist cultures, in a lot of Islamic countries where a lot of value is placed on nature, you know, value is placed on human life, there is less immediate exploitation, ideally. Ideally. We know what happened to like a lot of like workers in Qatar or Saudi Arabia, so that's why I say ideally. So I think there is some sort of like cultural, just basic understanding of the way that clothing should be produced and not exploitative, or the way that the environment should be treated and things like that. But unfortunately, some people who I talk to, they also saw fast fashion as a future, so they're waiting to become a fast fashion brand. And I was like, can we talk about this? So unfortunately, I feel like that's the direction that a lot of Iranian underground designers want to go, despite maybe not being able to be there just yet. And then, in respect to how my art or my work has been responded to by the Iranian community, it's a very complicated way. I think for a lot of older Iranians, a lot of Iranians who haven't gone back to Iran for a very, very long time, they usually get actually very emotional seeing my book, just because it's changed so much in the past 5 years, let alone the past maybe 20 years since they've been back to the country. That just flipping through the photos is very emotional for them, whether it's good or bad. And then some people, of course, say that my work is too political, so they say I tend to aggravate white people too much in my work. And so a lot of, unfortunately, in the United States, Iranians play model minority very, very much. And the fact that, for example, when the Muslim ban came out, their activism was like, ban the Egyptians, they're the terrorists, not us, you know. So, unfortunately, that's how a lot of Iranians do activism in this country. They very much play model minority, very much play into like white supremacy, because many of us are white passing, so we have a lot of privilege in that sense. And so in that case, they're like, stop being so political, which to I say never. But then there are like a younger generation of Iranians who are starting to become more radical or more leftist, and they do want to challenge. They also, in a similar place of me, in that they want to challenge, you know, what's happening here, but they also don't want to let their own government go. They want to be able to hold more than one government accountable, and that's kind of where my work is at. I'm not a nationalist. I don't believe in borders at all. I'm a fake nationalist sometimes when it's fun, but it really is a way of kind of, I guess, political views, whether or not you feel that you're a nationalist and you just, Iran is this perfect country, like a lot of people here are about their country, a lot of people are, you know, in general, or if it's just they just want to be against one country and not forget about something else. So it depends, I guess, how much complexity they have in their understandings of things. Yeah, so it's very mixed.
Hoda, thank you so much for
Thank
your great
you.
talk. Thank you.